Hi everyone, it's Don, and I'm getting a lot of messages today because of all the flights and things like that that were delayed and things that happened and responsibilities of the airline and what's supposed to happen. So I'll tell you what's supposed to happen right after this. So here's just some examples of some of the things that happened, say, here in Canada with all the ice storms and the bad weather that we had just the last few days. On one night, a flight was delayed where we all know how bad it is if your flight is delayed and you're sitting in the airport and now it's getting overcrowded because people are expecting to leave on the next flights and your flight's still there. And the waiting rooms just get hugely combusted and busy, and people are frantic. You have crying babies and concerns. Well, imagine all that happening, except now you're on the plane, but you're still not going anywhere. And that's probably the worst case scenario. If you're in the airport terminal, at least you can go sit down someplace, find some food someplace, get some drink, water. Once you're on the plane, you're kind of at the mercy of the airline and what they can offer you. And a few different flights, for instance, in Toronto, one flight was delayed 10 hours when the plane was still stuck on the tarmac and didn't leave. The passengers were not given water or food. People were throwing up because the planes don't sit there with their air conditioning and everything running. They just sit there because if they had all that running, they would run out of juice and the engines would have to run, and you can't run engines without flying because they'll overheat and things like that. So that was one. Then the very next day, another flight was delayed over 6.5 hours until finally somebody called 911 and the police showed up and finally they were let off the plane. So why do airlines do this? Well, because if they allow you to come back in, then they're responsible for all your delays after that because they're canceling your flight and all the insurances and all that kick in. If you're still on the plane's not officially canceled and they're hoping to get you airborne. It doesn't matter if it's 10 hours late, 20 hours late. Once you board the plane, that's the time you board it. It doesn't matter how long it takes to get there. As long as you're on the plane, they met their commitment is one of the reasons. Another example was of somebody flying back from Panama to Toronto's Pearson International Airport, which usually takes about 4.5 hours to fly. Well, they were told to leave the airport. There might be some delays, but head off to the airport. Your plane will be there shortly. Once they got to the airport, they waited and they waited and they waited. Hours went by and finally the airline sent a plane from Calgary, which is much further than Toronto, to pick them up. And did they fly them to Toronto? No. They flew them from Panama to Cancun, where they sat on the tarmac for 3.5 hours, where the temperatures inside the plane reached over 90 degrees. It's worse being stuck in the cold. Imagine being stuck in 90-degree temperatures with no air conditioning and stuck in a middle seat in a plane. It would be absolutely horrible. And what is supposed to happen is after a reasonable amount of time, providing it's safe to do so, the stewardesses and the airline stewards should be offering snacks and should be offering water and drinks to keep the passengers from, getting hungry and helping to keep the kids quiet, things like that. After 90 minutes, you are supposed to be allowed to be let off the plane of being on the plane. And they will fight this tooth and nail not to have to do this if they can, like I said, because they don't want to pay all the fines and things like that. So, but they are supposed to let you out. So after a reasonable amount of time, but what can you do when you're on the plane other than call like that one lady did, 911? That flight from Panama finally took off and arrived in Toronto 19 hours later from the time they first arrived at the airport to the time they arrived in Toronto, what was supposed to be a direct flight. So you can see how aggravating that would be. And there's really no recourse until after you're off the plane. And even then, in some cases, people were sitting on tarmacs for 10 hours. They can end up canceling the flight, but these people were on their way to weddings and things like that. They paid $3,000-$4,000 for their hotels, which are now canceled because there's no flight even the next day to get them there. And airlines are offering them $150, $200 future cruise or future flight thing, which is totally unacceptable. So we'll see what happens with all these stories going further. Airlines have to be much more responsible. It's one thing to cancel a flight. It's a whole other thing to leave people on the plane for 6-10 hours. It's absolutely ridiculous. And of course, the worst story of all was the Southwest Airlines flight from New York to Dallas, that the engine exploded in midair and caught fire, sending shrapnel through the fuselage and killing one passenger. Another passenger was almost being sucked out of the broken window when two men managed to grab her and help keep her in the plane. So true heroes there, because if you see and hear an explosion on a plane, you're 22,000 feet in the air, your first thoughts might not be to look somewhere else. Your first thoughts might be to grab that air mask and start, but they saw this woman in peril and they did what they could to save her. So hats off to those gentlemen, because we all don't know how we would react in that situation. We'd like to think we would do that, but you don't know, because I'm terrified of heights and I don't like flying whatsoever, and this is probably one of the worst case scenarios you could ever think of. As you can see by some of the pictures, the window being blown out, the engine looks horrible. Imagine looking out your window and seeing this is your engine. Like, oh my God, what would be going through your mind, right? And again, I have to say hats off to the crew as well, who helped keep everybody calm. They did what they were supposed to do in order. They helped people follow directions. They tried to assist people right away. The pilot managed to land the plane after an engine exploded in midair after only 20 miles of flight. They managed to turn and land in Philadelphia. So great job to the pilot and the crew all around. Nothing so far but praise from the passengers for the crew involved. So that's a great story to hear, because yes, they fly all the time, but they don't have engines blow up all the time. So their reaction was perfectly professional and helped calm other people who were panicking. And of course, for a person like myself who's terrified of flying, this is absolutely horrific to me, and I'm flying again in less than 3 weeks. So that scares the heck out of me, because it's the lack of control, right? When you're driving, you feel you're in control of the situation. When you're on a plane, you have to rely on others and you just let it go, right? But I still have to stress, this has been the first fatality on a US or Canadian airline since 2009. So that's 9 years without a single fatality. When was the last time that you heard of a fatality of somebody driving in your own city? It probably happens every single day. So that just lets you know that flying is still the safest out there. The planes are inspected regularly, not just by the airlines, but by flight officials and airline regulations. They check them as well. So yes, this is a tragic story, but it could have been so much worse. When you look at the pictures of that engine, can you imagine if the explosion would have been a little bit bigger, enough to cause damage to the wing itself? We could have lost everybody on that flight. So thank goodness that didn't happen. My condolences to the family. I'm not going to say the name of the lady right now because I'm not sure if it's out there, and I don't want this to be the first place that their family hears about it. So condolences to the family. Tragic story, but air flight is still the safest out there. I know we keep saying that, and I'm terrified to fly in 2 weeks, but I'm going to be flying in 2 weeks. So there. Well, I hope you found this video somewhat comforting in the fact that the crew and the pilots reacted so well, and I hope that you are just as frustrated with the flight delays and the way that some airlines handle the situation when you're stuck actually on the plane and not able to get off for hours and hours and hours on end. That is absolutely ridiculous. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos and more cruising tips, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Until next time, have yourself a safe and a great vacation.